welcome back to my channel. So today I'm going to do something a little bit different. I'm going to do a bookstore vlog, and these are vlogs that I really enjoy watching on YouTube, but I've never actually made one myself. And like I said in my 2025 goals video, I want to get back into reading this year, and I really have been doing that. I've read, how many books have I read so far? I think I've read 6 books so far in 2025, so we're doing good, and I've been really enjoying it. I'm gonna be doing it in a little bit of a different way though. So I read my books on my Kindle, but I also just like to collect books. So even when I read books on my Kindle, I like to have a hard copy of the book. And so today I'm going to be getting the books that I read over January and February in hard copy form at the bookstores, and then talk about the books that I read when I come back from the bookstore with you guys, and kind of give like a review of the books that I've read so far. Also, I want to make sure that I'm collecting the books that I'm reading because Ben and I want to build bookshelves back here up against, like, next to the fireplace, and also want to build some bookshelves in like our front room area to create a little library situation. Don't know if that's ever gonna happen, but theoretically, if and when that happens, I want to have books to be able to put on it. So yeah, even though I'm reading things on my Kindle, I want to make sure I have the hard copy. But that is the plan for today. Come along with me for a little bookstore adventure. I want to go to 2 bookstores today. So the first one is a cell phone bookstore, and I've never been there before. So I have a cell phone bookstore that is near me that I actually went to last weekend, but this one's new. I've never been there before, so we're gonna try that. And then I want to go to Barnes & Noble, which is pretty classic, pretty stable place to go for books. Yeah, that's where we're going today. Come along with me. Alright, so we've arrived at the first bookstore. It is the cell phone bookstore called Sam's Lotson, and it's actually in a mall, which is a little bit different, but I'm excited. I was reading a little bit about it on Google Maps, and it says that they have used and unused books, and I think it says the used ones are $2 and the new ones are $4, which is pretty crazy. That's super cheap, so I'm interested to see what we can find in there. Alright, we're out now. I didn't take much footage in there because I wasn't in there for that long, but that place was cool. So I was wrong. They actually have hard covers for $4 and paperback copies for $2, but most of the stuff in there was like used books, and it wasn't good for what I'm going for now, which has a very fixed agenda where I'm looking for very specific books. But it would be a good place to go if you had more of an open mind and you were just looking for new things to read. They had a lot of classics in there that I recognized from like when I read them when I was in college, and it was also cool because it was entirely self-serve. So they had like a checkout there that you could check out your stuff, and it just felt like very free there. Like you could just kind of go at your own pace. You didn't feel like anyone was bothering you, and it was just a very chill and relaxed environment in there. So that place was cool. I'll definitely go back when I'm in a different headspace than I am now. Right now I'm looking for very specific books. So we're gonna go into Barnes & Noble now. I'm here at Barnes, and see what I can find there. I don't know why it just went dark now, but we're going in. And here we are, the great Barnes & Noble. Alright, so that was kind of unsuccessful in Barnes & Noble. I only found 1 book on my list. So I decided to go back to the bookstore that's close to my house because I know they have a couple there because I saw them last week when I was there. So I'm going to see if they still have them. Alright, I'm back now. I'm in my garage, which is why it's so dark in here. But they actually had the rest of the books that I needed at that bookstore. I should have just went there first. They had everything I needed except for one of the books, which I got at Barnes & Noble. So yeah, I was able to get them all. So I'm excited to talk about them. Let me just get inside, get cozy. Maybe I'll make a cup of tea and we can talk about the books. I am awkwardly hunched over here, but I'm just going to make a cup of Earl Grey tea here for our little chat. And now we can cozy up and talk about some books. All right, we have our cup of tea. The fireplace is on. It also makes like a vent sound, so just ignore that if you can hear that. And finally ready to talk about the books that I read in January and February of 2025. Here are all of the books I read in January and February, and I'll talk about them in the order that I read them. So just a little overview of the books. So we have David Nichols' You Are Here. We have Chanel Miller's Know My Name, Emily Henry, Funny Story, Michelle Zauner, Crying in H Mart, Kristen Hanna, The Women, and Percival Everett, James. So today the ones that I bought were You Are Here by David Nichols, Chanel Miller's Know My Name, Funny Story, and James. Oh, Eloise is coming to say hi. So those are the ones I bought today. The other ones I had already. So I already had The Women and I already had Crying in H Mart. Also, it's February 21st today, so I may still read some more in February, but at this point, this is what I've read so far. Also, I just went through all the books and looked at my highlights that I made on my Kindle and picked my favorite ones and highlighted them in the physical books. So yeah, I'm gonna read like a couple of passages from the books that were my favorites. But yes, let's just get started. So the first book that I read in January was David Nichols' You Are Here. And this was kind of my first step back into reading for fun, because like I said in my 2025 goals video, in between college and then law school and then becoming a lawyer where I read and write for a living, I kind of lost like my hobby of reading, which I used to really enjoy. And so my goal for 2025 was to get back into that hobby and to find the joy and fun in it. And so I feel like this was a good book to kickstart that for me. David Nichols is also the author of One Day, which you probably know, like the Anne Hathaway movie One Day came out years ago, and it's a romance novel. This similarly is also a romance novel, and I kind of was walking into this book unsure because in the past I hadn't really liked romance books. I feel like the ones that I've read before were just not really well written, not interesting, and kind of cliche. And I feel like this book was the exact opposite of all of those expectations that I had, which was really nice because it kind of made me want to read more romance and just more lighthearted books. This book is about two people who just got out of relationships, and they're kind of loners, they're kind of introverts, not kind of, they are introverts, and they're very comfortable just being on their own and doing their own thing. But there's also a part of them that feels like they're missing out on something. And so they are kind of forced to go on this trip through the English countryside, like through the lakes in England, with one of their mutual friends. So they start out not knowing each other and they meet each other on this trip that they're taking through their mutual friend. And the whole book is about how they meet each other on this trip. They're walking through the English countryside on their hiking trip, and they make all these different stops along the way. And it's really just a story of these two people who are loners getting to know each other and forming a relationship. I really enjoyed it because of the setting in the English countryside. It was like, it felt like you were really there and going on this walk with them. And I also really enjoyed just the way that it was written. It was very well written. It was not cliche. The language that they use in conversation seemed like it was something people would say in everyday language. And I feel like it just touched on broader themes beyond just like a typical romance novel. I feel like it touched on themes of the importance of belonging to something beyond yourself, actually making connections with people, getting out into the world and having experiences beyond like your insular, you know, introverted self, which for me, I feel like I really resonated with this book because I'm an introvert, and yeah, the two main characters are introverted as well. I feel like the banter between the two characters was really natural, and it was funny, it was witty. I just really liked it. And I gave this book a 4 out of 5 stars on Goodreads. I only knocked it a star just because I feel like a romance book, in order for me to give it 5 stars, would have to be so good. It's got to have a little bit something more for me to bring it up to 5. But this, I really enjoyed this book. Would recommend it to other people. Next book is Know My Name by Chanel Miller, and I am obsessed with Chanel Miller now. I'm obsessed with this book. It was so good. One of my favorite books I've ever read. In my top 10 favorite books now. I absolutely loved this book. So this book is an autobiography, and Chanel Miller, if you don't know her, is the woman who like 10 years ago was sexually assaulted on Stanford's campus, and it was a huge thing in the media. It started this big conversation around sexual assault on college campuses and just sexual assault against women in general. And there was a lot of focus in the media on Brock Turner, who was the man who sexually assaulted her, on his criminal trial. And he ended up getting like a really light sentence. I think he got like 6 months in jail, and she describes in the book like even 6 months in jail is not actually 6 months, because if someone behaves well when they're in there, their sentence gets reduced as they're in there. So he wasn't even in there for 6 months. Anyway, so when all of this was happening back then, Chanel Miller wasn't known as Chanel Miller, and people didn't even know who she really was. She went by Emily Doe in the court case, and people spoke about her that way on TV, in the media. This book came out in 2019, so a little less than 10 years after all of that happened, she came out with this memoir where she reveals her identity, and she kind of talks about her experience through all of this. Going into this, I knew the backstory of Chanel Miller. I knew about the public nature of her sexual assault and all of that. But what I was not expecting and what I did not know was how good of a writer she is and how just awesome of a person she is. I'm like obsessed with her now, and I would read anything that she does ever again. She is just an amazing writer. Like, she is one of those writers who I feel like just has a natural knack for it. She's naturally talented, and she has like, she's just a cut above the rest, and she has a way of being able to tap into certain emotions and describe them that is very special and unusual, I feel like, for someone to have that ability. And so this book, it starts off with her talking about leading up to the night of the sexual assault, the immediate aftermath of the sexual assault, and then on to the trial and kind of the resolution after the trial. And I feel like a lot of people in the media at the time kind of tried to like downplay the sexual assault and downplay Brock Turner's actions. And I feel like just reading this book, you realize what a violation and how horrific of a thing it is to do what he did to her, and how much it just totally upends somebody's life. But the thing about Chanel Miller is she's just like such an amazing of a person that she was able to take this experience that happened to her and transform it into something bigger than herself, transform it into something meaningful. And she kind of talks about how she feels like in this book this thing happened to her, and it feels like she was kind of the perfect person for it to happen to, as terrible as that is. And even though she says like she does not believe things happen for a reason, she would rather it had not happened to her, she kind of was like, well, if it happened to me, let me make something of it and let me tell my story. It's like one of those books you read where you're like, wow, I'm so happy that this person exists in this world, in this time, at this moment. I just feel like this is one of those books that I am going to force everyone in my inner circle to read, because I feel that strongly about it. It is just amazing. So I highlighted this book the most out of all the books I've read this year. I had so many highlights on my Kindle, but I just picked 2 of my favorites to read to you guys. So the first quote is about her talking to her mom about how much she's struggling with everything. And her mom came here from communist China, and so she's kind of trying to give her some advice about how, given her background in communist China, she could have never imagined all the good things that were going to come to her when she came to America. And so She says, "What may seem ordinary to me was never lost on her. There were a million ways things could have gone differently, but somehow she had made it here. The very fact of my existence, some kind of miracle." When she was young, inventing stories, she never imagined a life full of swimming pools, daughters drinking iced coffee, California coastlines full of wild poppies. When I listened to her, I understood. You have to hold out to see how your life unfolds, because it is most likely beyond what you can imagine. It is not a question of if you will survive this, but what beautiful things await you when you do. I had to believe her because she was living proof. Then she said, "Good and bad things come from the universe holding hands. Wait for the good to come." Just so beautiful. There's like a million moments like that in this book where she's just able to tie things together so nicely, and it just like heals a little part of you, you know? And then I have another one in here that I wanted to read. Let me get to that. This is another one where she's talking to her mom, actually. I didn't realize that as I was highlighting them, but yes, this is like another conversation she's having with her mom. And I feel like this passage is very applicable to our modern day here. So she says, "If ever I was distraught or heartbroken, my mom would always say, 'Go read history,' her solution for everything. For so long, I believed history was a thick book you carried around in your backpack, not something you could create. It was 1 hour in an air-conditioned, portable classroom after lunch, watching Civil War reenactments, our teacher making us eat expired crackers called hardtack so we could empathize with the soldiers' diet in World War II. It'd take me a long time to realize history is happening now, and we are part of it. History is where you will find people who have been through what you're experiencing. Not only been there, but survived it. Not only survived it, but changed it. Whose struggles informed them. History shows you what people have endured before you. The year before I was born, Anita Hill testified before the Senate. In 2018, she sent her support to Michelle, thanking her for forcing judges to take rape seriously, signing off, 'All my best, Anita.' History shows that if you were in the minority, if no one believed you, it didn't mean you were wrong. Rather, it meant society was slow to catch up to you. And if those in the minority did not buckle, did not give up their truths, the world would shift below their feet." Chanel Miller. I love her. I love her. And everyone needs to read that book. Needless to say, I gave this book a 5 out of 5. That book, I think, was my favorite book I read of all the ones I read so far in 2025. It's hard to follow up with Know My Name by Chanel Miller, but next one I want to talk about is Funny Story by Emily Henry. So this is another romance book that I read, and it wasn't as good as You Are Here by David Nichols. It wasn't as well written or as witty, but it was still good nonetheless, and I feel like it was kind of a non-traditional romance book, if that makes sense. I feel like this book is really popular online, so I don't even think I really need to explain it, but if you haven't heard about it. So this book is about two people whose significant others just broke up with them. They were long-term relationships, and the hook is their exes broke up with them so that they could be together with each other, if that makes sense. So the main character, her name is Daphne, and the other main character, who's the love interest, his name is Miles. Their exes broke up with them so that they could be with each other. They were like childhood best friends, and they just left them in the dust. And so the story is that these two people who are just broken up with, Daphne was living with her ex-boyfriend and she didn't have anywhere to live. So she ended up moving in with Miles, who also had a place in his apartment for her to move into because he just got broken up with. So yeah, they become roommates, and it's obviously a romance, so they fall for each other. And the book is just about how their relationship unfolds when they're living together and dealing with the dynamic with their exes. And honestly, I feel like this book is just a feel-good read. Like, it's very easy to read, very quick. I feel like this would be a good book to read in the summer because it takes place in a lakeside town in Michigan, and it's just a good love story. I feel like this book is catered towards people like my age as well because it has some themes in there about like early adulthood and friendships going into early adulthood and just kind of finding your way in life. I just feel like the main character in this book could be like one of my friends in real life. But yeah, I really enjoyed it. It was definitely another great step into reading romance, and I definitely want to read some more books by her. I gave this book 4 out of 5 stars on Goodreads. I thought it was a very enjoyable read, but like I said, not the best book ever and kind of cliche in some ways, but I still really enjoyed it. So yeah. The next book is Crying in H Mart by Michelle Zauner. So I got this book like a couple of years ago for Christmas and I just never read it, and I actually listened to this one on an audiobook version. So I didn't actually read this, which I kind of regret that. I do wish I actually just read this, because I discovered when I was listening to this that I actually just prefer reading a book. Even though it was nice because this is a memoir, listening to Michelle Zauner's voice tell the story, I don't know, there's just something about reading that I prefer more, and I feel like I would have enjoyed this more if I read it. It's hard for me when I'm listening to an audiobook to stay focused on it. Like if I'm doing something else, which I usually am, when I'm listening to them, I find it hard to stay like locked in to the story and to the language. Like I feel like I can just gloss over some of the language with an audiobook, and that's obviously the best part about reading is the language. So I don't know, I'm not too big on audiobooks, I don't think. I'm not gonna totally discount them. I may still try to listen to some, but that's just how I feel at the moment. Oh my gosh, I just realized her picture, I don't know if that's a picture of her or her mom, but it's on the cover. I didn't see, because I read the audiobook, I never saw that. I think that must be a picture of her. It looks too high quality to be one of her mom. So yes, Michelle Zauner is a musician. She has a band called Japanese Breakfast, and she is Korean American. Her mom is Korean. Her dad is white, I don't know, American, I'm not sure. Honestly, I'm not sure. I just know he's white. And this is her memoir, and it's mostly a story about her relationship with her mom, her Korean heritage, growing up Korean American, and ultimately the death of her mom. Her mom passed away from cancer, and so this book is largely about her mom and her dealing with her mother's death. But also, because this book is about her Korean heritage and also her relationship with her mom, a lot of it has to do with food. So as you can see, there's food, and it's called Crying in H Mart. H Mart is an Asian marketplace, I think. Let me just tell you about this book. You need to be in the right mental headspace to read this book. If you're teetering, if you are sad, if you are just not doing well in life, you're not gonna be able to read this. Like, this book is heavy. It is heavy and it's sad. Like, this book made me cry multiple times. It's mostly sad because obviously her mother died, and the parts where she's talking about her mother's decline in health, dealing with her cancer, like, it is just brutal and it is very sad. Also, just dealing with her mother's death. She's an only child, like, she's kind of like going through this on her own, and it is, yeah, it's very sad. That being said, it is very well written. It's a great memoir. I think she touches on some really interesting themes about these blendings of cultures and identities. She has a very complicated relationship with her mother, and also kind of complicated relationship with her Korean background, and what it looks like dealing with all of that in the wake of her mother's sickness and death. Deals with lots of complicated themes. It's very heavy, but it's very well written, and it is humorous at times. She does have a little bit of a dry humor to her. Every once in a while though, she just drops like a line here or there that just hits you right in the gut and makes you cry, basically. I did a lot of crying listening to this book. Mostly while I was cooking dinner, I'd have it on in the background and I'd just be standing there like cutting vegetables, crying. Because I listened to this, I wasn't like highlighting things as I went, but I was just sitting here trying to think of moments that I could remember from listening to it that hit me hard. And so I was able to find one in the book, and I thought I'd just read it for you. So in this passage, it's after her mom's funeral, and I think she's just gotten back to her parents' house after the funeral, and she hears a knock on the door, and she goes through the door and no one's there. But there was like a gift on the doorstep, and inside of it was a ceramic teapot, and the person left a letter on it. And the letter was written by her mom's art teacher, who was also Korean, and it was addressed to her mom. And the letter is basically about having her in art class, how much he's going to miss her, and you know, all of those things about their friendship. So Michelle sees the teapot and she reads this letter that's addressed to her mom, and she says, "Why hadn't she waited for me to answer the door? Clearly my mother's art teacher knew she had passed, yet she kept this letter addressed to her. And if it was for my mother, I wondered why hadn't she written it in Korean? Had she translated it specifically for me? There was part of me that felt, or maybe hoped, that after my mother died, I had absorbed her in some way, that she was a part of me now. I wondered if her art teacher felt this way too, that I was the closest she could get to being heard." That's my cat running in the background, but I just thought that was so beautiful because, and she kind of alludes to this in other parts of the book about how in her mother's absence, people kind of look to her to kind of fill that void, and she also wishes that she could fill that void, and also wishes that her mother is part of her and that she can live up to her and be what her mother was for her to all these other people that had these relationships with her. And it's especially complicated with Michelle because Michelle, while she knows some Korean, she can't speak it fluently like her mother could, and so she's dealing with like these relationships with relatives where there's like this language barrier, and there's part of her that wishes in her mother's absence that she could just be for these people what her mother was for them. And I'd never heard about someone write about grief like that. The idea of like feeling like you want to absorb the person that has passed. I feel like everyone has felt that when they've lost somebody, and I just really like that passage, how she put it into words. But yes, I really enjoyed this book. I think I gave it a 4 out of 5 on Goodreads. It was very well written, but yeah, like I said, it takes a lot for me to give a book 5 stars, but I definitely would recommend that one. The next book was highly disappointing. I was looking forward to reading this book, The Women by Kristen and Hannah, so much. So I bought this book back in October, and I've had it sitting on my nightstand, and I just keep looking at it, and I was like, I can't wait to read that. I'm gonna find, like, I really want to wait till I'm in the right headspace to read it because it's about the women who served in Vietnam as nurses and in healthcare, and I thought that sounded like such a great premise. I was really looking forward to this book, and I had heard so many good things about it. I thought it was going to be amazing, and I was so disappointed in this book. I really wanted to love it, and within the first like 10 pages, I was like, this isn't gonna be good. This isn't gonna be good. And I was so disappointed. So let me just give you an overview of what this book is about. The main character's name is Frances McGrath, and she comes from a well-off family. She lives in California in like basically a mansion, comes from a well-off conservative family, and it's during the time of the Vietnam War. And so her family, particularly her dad, have this reverence for military service, and they have all these family members who have served in various wars throughout the years, and they have a whole wall dedicated to them in their house. And so I don't want to give too much away when I'm giving this synopsis, so I'm gonna tread over things and try to talk about this generally. So her brother goes off to Vietnam first in combat, and then she is a new nurse. She just got her nursing degree, and she started working in a hospital. And she comes into contact when she's in the hospital with someone who had served in Vietnam. And so she just kind of gets inspired through this and by her brother being over in Vietnam to go serve in Vietnam as a nurse. So she enlists in the army, and she goes over to Vietnam and serves as a nurse there. And you kind of are following her story through her time in Vietnam, from starting as a beginner in the hospital and then working her way up in the hospital. She has various romantic relationships over in Vietnam, friendships that she forms, and then she comes home, and you kind of follow her story through PTSD that she's dealing with when she comes home, and dealing with her family, who is not proud of her service despite being proud of all the other members of her family who have served before. And that is the basic gist of the story. And that sounds good to me. Like, if someone told me that's what this book was about, I'd be very interested in reading it, and I was. And I really like how it focuses on the women who served in Vietnam, because I feel like not a lot of stories are told about that, and I don't even really think about that when I think about Vietnam. The premise of it is great. The execution is terrible. This book is not well written at all, and I would read passages of it to Ben as I was sitting here reading it, because I'd be like, just listen to this, and he'd be like, that sounds like it was written by AI. And that, I feel like, is the best way I can describe this. It sounds like somebody told like ChatGPT write a story about a nurse who served in Vietnam and all these different things happened to her, and like ChatGPT spewed out the story. And I think the best way I can describe why this is bad is because it took every single stereotype or cliche about Vietnam and made it happen to one person. And it didn't like delve into these issues deeply in any like meaningful way. You were just kind of watching like bang, 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 all these things happening to this one person, and it was all surface level. It had no depth to it, even though all of these things are very serious topics and they seem like they would be very interesting and like you could really like get into a great story with this. But that was not the case. It was so disappointing. And like the romance part of this book, also cliche, and it was just frustrating. Like, I don't know, it was bad. And I also feel like every plot twist that happened in this book, it was 100% predictable. She foreshadows things in such an explicit, like in your face manner that you're like, well, obviously that's gonna happen now in the future, like thanks for telling me. And that just happens over and over and over again in the book, where it's like, it should be this big moment, but because she was like in your face with it before, you were expecting it. But yes, like I said, it just took every single stereotype from Vietnam and put it in one book. That's the best way to describe it. Like at the end of the book, after I had read it, I said that to Ben and he just started rattling off everything he could think of about Vietnam, and I was like, yep, that was in it. That was in it. That was in it too. Yep. And also, the way that this was written, because she just stuffed all of these things onto this one person, like there's so many themes you deal with Vietnam, right? Like there's a million things you can think of and they're all happening to this one person. And so because it's all happening to one person, it's like you read one thing happens on one page, you turn the page, like 5 pages later, another thing is happening. 5 pages later, another thing is happening. And it's just like all these crazy things happening to one person within the span of like 20 pages. And so you don't have any time to like meaningfully get into any of these things. It's just kind of like, I don't know, it feels like soap opera to me. It feels like a Vietnam soap opera. I saw somebody on Goodreads said like, if Meredith Grey went to Vietnam, this is the book that would come out of it. I feel like that is spot on. That's spot on how I feel about it. And I'm so disappointed because I really wanted to like it. I really wanted to like Kristen Hanna. I may still give some of her other books a chance because she does have other like historical fictions. That being said, I did read it pretty quickly. Obviously the story was like moving along because all these things were happening in quick succession. So it did move very fast and it was entertaining to read because it was just kind of ridiculous. If you want to be entertained, I would say read it, but don't expect anything great and don't expect to get into these issues in any serious or meaningful manner. I don't know. I think the reason I was so disappointed in this book is because the story of a nurse in Vietnam, like all the themes that come along with Vietnam, the untold story of the women who served in Vietnam, like that is such fertile ground for just a great book. And it just was not. It just was not. So yes, The Women I gave 2 out of 5 stars on Goodreads, and I feel like that's an appropriate rating because it did have an entertaining aspect to it, but it was otherwise pretty terrible. That's all I'll say about that. And the next book I read after The Women was James by Percival Everett. And I feel like this book was such a great cleanse after reading The Women. It was like a historical fiction that was actually well done. And yes, this book is great. I gave this book 5 out of 5 stars on Goodreads. And so the premise of this book is that it's a retelling of the adventures of Huckleberry Finn, but from Jim's perspective. And Jim is a slave in Huckleberry Finn. I had never read Huckleberry Finn before. Actually, before I read this book, I looked up the plot of it on Wikipedia. And that book sounds crazy. Like there's so many things that happen in it. I kind of want to go back and read it now, but yes, this is a retelling of it. From what I understand, Huckleberry Finn in the actual book does not focus on Jim all that much. You don't really get his perspective of things. You're in the perspective of Huck, who is like a child on this like adventure with a slave. Sounds very bizarre. And this book is from Jim's perspective, or James as he calls himself eventually in the book. The plot of this book is that James is a slave on a plantation where Huck is like, honestly, I don't really understand his relationship to the white people there. I think he's like the son of the people that own the plantation. It was a little bit unclear to me how he was just like hanging around here at this plantation. And so James is a slave on this plantation where Huck is kind of hanging around, and they kind of have this like childlike friendly relationship. And James has a family. He has a wife and a daughter who he lives with on this plantation, and he gets word that he is going to be sold to a different plantation and be separated from his wife and his daughter. And so he comes up with this idea that he's going to escape and come up with some sort of plan where he can come back and buy them and they can leave and live freely together. He kind of doesn't really know what he's gonna do, but he just decides to escape and figure it out once he leaves. And so he does that, and Huck comes with him. And I don't want to give anything away, but all these series of events happen, and it's very gripping. Like, to me, this book reads like a movie. Like, it's very cinematic. I feel like this book could easily get turned into a movie, just the way that it's written. All you need to do is just take like chapter by chapter and put it on the screen. Like, that's how this book reads to me. It's so good, and it keeps you on the edge of your seat. And it also deals with a lot of complicated themes, which I'm sure Huckleberry Finn did not deal with. Like, James is a slave who is able to read and write, but at the same time, he's trying to conceal that fact about himself. I also feel like this book sheds light on the brutal reality of slavery and the absolute horror and inhumanity of it. But at the same time, the way that it's written, Percival Everett is big on irony, and he has like a dry sense of humor, which is weird to say because of, you know, the heavy nature of the themes that you're dealing with in this book, but he somehow is able to make it work. But I think the reason it works so well in this book is he's able to use irony to point out the absolute absurdities of slavery and about that time period. So yeah, it sounds weird saying that there's some humor in it, but it makes sense when you read the book. But my understanding is, you know, Huckleberry Finn didn't really focus on Jim, but this book really creates like a full picture of him as a human. He's intelligent, he's compassionate, he has all these complicated feelings, and I think the most interesting part about him is this aspect of him wanting to read and write. And throughout the story, he has dreams where he's talking to different philosophers and different characters from books, and he just has this intellectual part to him that I really enjoyed. And as the story goes on, he's tapping into this part of himself more, and he starts like writing his own story and discovering his own agency, and I just thought it was really well done. And the end of this book was like one of the most satisfying endings to a book that I've read in a long time. I really, really enjoyed it. The end is the part where I was like, I feel like this just needs to be a movie. Someone needs to make this into a movie. It would be perfect. But from beginning to end, I thought this book was so good. I think it's an instant classic. It was so easy to read. I think I read it in like less than a week, and I gave this a 5 out of 5 on Goodreads because it was that good. So yes, I would really recommend this book. I think this was my favorite fiction book of the books I've read in January and February, and Chanel Miller's Know My Name was my favorite in like the non-fiction category. But both of those were my favorites out of all the ones that I read. But yes, that's a wrap up of the books I read in January and February of this year. Thank you guys for coming along with me to the bookstore and then for this little discussion. I want to make more videos like this in the future where we go to bookstores and talk about books, and I've definitely been enjoying getting back into the hobby of reading. It's like my new favorite thing to do now. But thank you guys for watching. If you're not subscribed already, please subscribe to my channel. I'm trying to get up to 100 subscribers on YouTube in 2025, so please subscribe if you're not subscribed, and let me know what you've been reading in the comments. I would like to get some more ideas for what I should read in 2025. Thank you guys for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye.